What I'd like to show off here is going to be our Legent Bourbon. And Legent is our newest product. I actually have a sneak preview of the new label there. I'm not going to show it for too long because it's not quite out yet. It'll be out in the summertime. So Michael, if you don't mind maybe showing your bottle, because that's the one that's going to be easier to find right now. But Legent was launched in 2019 as a completely unique spirit. And a lot of times what we've done is we've innovated with extending, say, Knob Creek or Basil Hayden and doing some innovation there. But Legent was really its own unique bourbon, its own unique brand, standing alone. And so what we did here was really we wanted to announce ourselves as Beam Suntory. You know, we've only been a company for about 7 years, even though we have 225 years of whiskey making history with the Beam family and almost 80 years of whiskey making history with the Torrey family over at Suntory. But bringing these two families together 7 years ago and these two businesses together 7 years ago, we really are a relatively young company. And we wanted to see if we could announce who we are. We're a coming together of cultures, we're a coming together of people, we're a coming together of businesses, we're a coming together of whiskey drinking culture. And so what we do really well over here in the United States, we do everything well here when we talk about making bourbon, but really our strengths are in production, creating great distillate, maturing it in the new wood to where it really develops big, bold flavors, making that the hallmark of what we do, not just at Beam, but also what we do in the bourbon industry. Big, bold flavors come from bourbon. And then when you think about what the strength is over in Japan, and you think about, yes, they make delicious whiskey, of course, but they're really great blenders. So playing around with flavor and balancing out flavors that not just come from different ages, but also finishing whiskey in different barrels. And finishing is something that we've played around with here, but it's not really one of those, dyed in the wool practices that we have in the United States. It's much more appropriate for people that do rely on blending, like in Scotland or Ireland or Japan. And so this was bringing our two cultures together and bringing our strengths together. So we have Fred No, who's our master distiller and Booker's son. We talked about Booker for a moment there as our 6th generation who brought small batch to light, the innovator of the small batch idea of bourbon. And then his son, Fred, is now our master distiller, with his son being our 8th generation coming up in training right now. But Fred worked with Shinji Fukuyo, who is the 5th ever chief blender from the House of Suntory, and they took bourbon that Fred had made in Kentucky, and then he and Shinji worked on finishing some of that bourbon, and I'll get into that in a second. And then Shinji took those bourbons and the finished bourbons and blended them together to create a unique flavor, which is Legent. And so Fred makes the bourbon according to a lot of the traditional practices that we have established there in Kentucky, with fermentation, distillation, maturation, etc. And then he and Shinji agreed on a couple of different barrel finishes that they would do. So we have an extra aged bourbon that serves as the majority of the blend, because this is a blended whiskey, and then also serves as the base for all the finishes that we'll do. So we have that extra aged bourbon being the majority of the blend. The second portion of the blend will be that extra aged bourbon that is finished in red wine barrels, ex-red wine barrels, so French oak. And then there's a smaller portion of the blend. Each of these are unique. They're not all three. One is bourbon, the other is bourbon finished in the red wine barrel, and the smallest portion of the blend is going to be that extra aged bourbon that is then finished in ex-Oloroso sherry barrels, so Spanish oak. Shinji will put all three of those, say, liquid streams together in a way that he and Fred did over 100 different combinations, going back and forth across seas. A lot of Zoom calls, probably before Zoom was cool, and a lot of late nights and early mornings with those two collaborating on opposite ends of the world. And lo and behold, in 2019, we were able to launch Legent, and it's a very complex, very unique bourbon. I'll go ahead and pour a little bit myself right now, and it's 94 proof, so we are getting a little bit higher up there in proof. And what you'll see in the glass is you now have, because of that proof, the darker the whiskey is going to be an indicator of age and proof, so water that's been added or not added for dilution. But because of the finishes, we also have a little bit of a ruby hue that's coming into play with the whiskey here. And then when we give this a nose, it's a bourbon, and this is a bourbon through and through. We like to say that Legent is a bourbon with the soul of Kentucky, but the nuance of Japan. And I think you can really kind of tell that with the aroma as it starts. There's no denying the vanillins and caramels and oak that come through. But But then you get some of the ripe red fruits that are going to come from the wine barrel. I like to think of things like red currants, a little bit of acidity, like just like a lemon rind or lemon zest comes through here, which really kind of brightens up the flavor as well as the aroma. And then as you kind of dig deeper into the whiskey and you let kind of that base settle, that's going to be where the Oloroso sherry comes through with some of that raisiny, resiny, you know, traditional cheese plate ingredients. When you think about your fig jam and stuff like that, that might be around your little fruit pastes and things. Like that's where the Oloroso is really going to come through. And also, I get a little bit of like a salinity from that Oloroso sherry that adds what I kind of describe as when, if you like skin on salted peanuts, I do, and that's kind of where I gravitate towards as far as like the salinity characteristic of this whiskey goes. And I think altogether, it's really a great cheese plate bourbon because of all those wonderful things. You have your whiskey, you know, we're expanding our boundaries and tasting bourbon with cheese and charcuterie. And then you have the traditional pairings of wine and sherry that goes so well with all of these ingredients. And probably it's less of a stretch than trying bourbon with those ingredients. So I think that we have what could be like a really fantastic, fun bourbon for all of our audiences to try out with all of our products at some point too. So I'm going to go ahead and try this, and I think that it's got a big flavor, so it's going to stand up to this fantastic blue cheese and the other pairings. I'll be quiet and learn from Zoe and Ryan now. So kick it over to you guys.
I sadly in Northern Vermont was not able to get my hands on this one, but the sensory descriptors are like, if I could have listed what to look for to pair with Bayley Hazen Blue, I would have ticked those boxes. So kudos for figuring that out. Bayley Hazen Blue is also a raw milk cheese, and this is made from our own cow. So the next two cheeses we're going to try are pasteurized because they're younger, and there's a federal law that you have to sell raw milk cheeses after 60 days of ripening, and our softer cheeses, we need to get them out in the world sooner. So we make both pasteurized and raw milk cheeses. But when we make raw milk cheeses like Highlander and Bayley, we always use our own cow's milk. We need total control over the production of what the cows eat, to exactly how they're fed and cared for and how they're milked. So this is another cheese made from Jasper Hill's own cows. And it's one of the first cheeses that we made back in 2003 was the first piece of cheese that we sold. And it was probably a piece of Bayley Hazen Blue. And I like to say that this is kind of a gateway blue. I was just talking with somebody else today and they're like, I like to say Bayley is a gateway blue. And I was like, me too. It's a perfect way to describe it because it's a classic blue cheese. You get those bold sort of spiced flavors, but it's not overwhelming, bitter, metallic, too harsh on the palate. So it's bold but well balanced, and it's sort of cheesy first. And especially in my wedge here, I'm not sure how yours are looking, but there's a lot of white space along with those openings that we've created to allow the blue mold to grow. So when you're making a blue cheese, it's one of the most challenging cheeses to make because you're really trying to make a soft ripened cheese inside out. You're trying to make the openness of the cheese like the crumb of a bread. We try to make just the right amount of openings in terms of their size and frequency, so that there's the right ratio of blue to white. And then we spike the cheeses with a stainless steel spike, and that allows the blue mold spores that we added to the milk during the cheese making process to breathe and flourish, to break down fats and proteins and make their own unique flavor. So let's try a little wedge here. The other thing about Bayley that I like is that it has a fairly sliceable texture, especially if you're working with a knife with a nice thin blade. Usually the softer the cheese, if you can reduce the surface area of the knife you're trying to cut it with, a nice thin knife. A lot of cheesemongers have like a beautiful little like quarter inch thick, very long skinny knife that they'll use for bries and blue cheeses, or even a harp, like a little half moon with a wire. They're just barely like putting a piece of dental floss through. That's the best way, but you can usually get a nice little wedge of Bayley without it being too wet or crumbly. And I like to eat the Bayley about an inch in from the rind. So the nose of the wedge tends to be a little spicier and a little less salty. And then the rind, where we're applying the salt, it sort of seeps its way in from the outside in and really sort of changes the experience. So it's kind of interesting to try it near the rind where you're getting more influence from those rind microbes doing their thing, versus in the center, which tends to be more heavily blued, a little spicier, a little less salty, more of those anise notes. Marked characteristics of Bailey that I often find are sherry notes. And sometimes we call batches rum raisin. Like it's sort of a recurring personality profile in Bailey, rum raisin. And so it's lovely when paired with sherries in general. But we also get like interesting toasty nuttiness that mirrors more of the aroma profiles that Adam was describing. So I'm going to be on the lookout. I'm going on a little road trip this weekend, and I'm going to be pulling over at all of the depots, checking for this pairing because it sounds perfect. Velvety texture, sort of fudgy texture, creamy on the palate, subtle spice note, and then those sort of oxidized sherry notes on the finish.
Well, I was able to find Legent in my area, which I was telling everybody before the call was very surprising because Utah keeps quite the control on liquor, as many of you may know. But I was able to find it. I was able to do some pairings over the weekend, going back and forth with different cheeses, different meats. And based on all of the flavor profiles that I had a chance to taste through and the combinations that I came up with, my favorite pairing for the Legent and the blue, which is always a home run for me, was the Varzi. And it's quite amazing how, you're familiar with each of these products, but you don't know the in-depth knowledge that Zoe or that Adam would have until you hear it. And it's amazing how these stories really line up together. So first I'll walk you through what Varzi is, and then a little bit more about the pairing itself. So very similar history behind Varzi in terms of the kind of the uniqueness that matches the other products that you're going to pair this with. So Varzi is actually a village. And if you do a Google Maps search for Varzi, you're going to find that it's kind of smack dab in the middle of a lot of regions that were bigger and more popular when it comes to very pronounced charcuterie and cheese from Italy. So you're a hop, skip, and a jump from Parmigiano Reggiano production territory. You're a hop, skip, and a jump from Parma legs being aged. You've got the fennel fields of Tuscany. And the producers in this very small village of Varzi really struggled to separate themselves from the nearby producers to create a product that would make them stand out. How do we do this? And they really didn't have a locally available spice, a locally available process, something that just really helped them stand out. And so in the early 1700s, a group of merchants from the village of Varzi decided to come together. They pooled their money, they pooled their resources, and they sent a scout down to meet the trade ships at the port of Genoa coming in from Indonesia. They made purchases of nutmeg, which was a very expensive, not readily available spice at the time. They took that nutmeg back to their village and they used that to finish the salami and create Varzi, which actually kind of brings out that like sweet nutmeg note and spice on the very finish. Almost everything that Cristiano does is pork first, flavor second, because there is such a beautiful quality to the pork that we're using. Again, being heritage breed and humanely raised, certainly not that we're trying to cover up the pork. We want to highlight and celebrate that. So what you'll get is very subtle notes of the spices and the flavors, always on the finish, kind of back up through the back of your mouth and into your nose on kind of the final bite and the run through of the eating of the charcuterie. So this Varzi typically pairs very well with a blue, in my opinion. It brings out it balances out some of those more robust notes without overpowering the cheese. And what I actually did in creating this pairing was kind of fold a layer of blue into almost a taco style slice of the Varzi salami. And then I actually did a little kind of wash of the Legent around the outer edge of the salami and ate that. And the way that the bite comes together with the blue, the salami, and that Legent was really incredible. Not to stop here, but this was my favorite pairing that I created between the blue cheese and the Varzi salami. So this one really came together for me and accentuated not only the Legent, but the blue and then the Varzi salami together. This was a really incredible pairing for me.
I just want to say that I love that you're you end all of your experimenting with like just trying to find out the best sort of vehicle to combine them together, whether it's like a ham sandwich or if you're making a taco. It's like I'm waiting for I'm really excited for the burrito and the George Foreman press to come out at the fourth pairing. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is a perfect pairing. The blue cheese brings in that mapley flavor that's in there, that earthiness that blends perfectly with the Legent. And then when you add in the Varzi on this, it just brings them all together. It's really just such a, I'd say, comfortable pairing where all the flavors just come together, and it's just nobody's fighting in this. This is like you know, everybody's too tired. They just want to just relax, and this is such a nice pairing. Adam, your thoughts?
Yeah, this tastes very fancy to me. You know, it all just works very well in the most fanciful way. I think that we had kind of that everyman pairing earlier, and I think that this is just elevated to that next level where it's just it's for everyone, but also you know that you're enjoying finer things with this pairing. I was I was a little bit skeptical of pairing up the blue cheese so early because of the big flavors that we're highlighting here, but I really think that they all work together in a way that is not, it's not big and ballsy. It's not brash. It is, you know, there's great flavor in the Varzi, there's great flavor in the blue cheese. The Legent has big flavor, but together there's just this, it's just fanciful and really nice. And I think that I want to taste them in all different orders. You know, I want to try them all because I think the ham and the cheese, going back to the ham, and then the whiskey is all really great. And then I'm just really, I guess I'm not surprised, but I'm delighted that having not met before, aside from all of us coming together through you, Michael, I mean, we're all kind of on the same page here. I think that's pretty cool, right? Like even the stories, the similarities, the collaborations, and bringing things together that you were saying, Ryan, and just the inspiration for the way that you bring the blue cheese together, Zoe. It's just, it's pretty. It's kind of magic. It's really cool.
Yeah,
it totally is. I would call this like the jet-setting international elegance pairing,
yeah.
Right? There's so many cultures that have been pulled together by connoisseurs to take like the best of different people's innovations without the ego of saying, well, we don't do that here.
Yeah.
In order to really just make the most elevated and interesting products. I mean, this blue cheese was based on a British style blue cheese made in the US, and then paired with such an interesting storied bourbon that utilizes both American and Japanese expertise, and then Spanish barrels. And then the Italian charcuterie, which borrowed traditions from another place as well. This really reminds me of a French approach to
charcuterie. So those warm spices. Oh,
I can hear you.
can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. It's got a little message from my earphones. And in that warm nutmeg spice blend really, to me, reminds me of the French approach. So I just love how it all came together. The warm spices with the Bayley Hazen Blue, that's how I describe Bailey. It's not like spicy and metallic. It's spiced, like anise spice. And we get some of those nutmeg notes, which I bet are perfect with those notes of sherry. So I can't wait to try it all together. I'm saving a pack. Thanks for sending a little extra, Ryan.
So Ryan, any last comments?
You know, I think I mentioned you mentioned this to you before, Michael, but usually when somebody calls me and asks me what to pair with blue cheese, I usually tell them to pick up another piece of blue cheese. That's the best pairing for blue cheese. So if you're double fisting anything, it should be blue cheese. So I was hesitant to understand what would come together so well with such a favorite personal cheese of mine. And the way that these flavors came together from Legent and Varzi with that cheese cheese was really incredible. I agree that if you're looking to really present that you know what you're doing when it comes to pairings, this is something that will knock the neighbor's socks off if you want to really showcase flavors coming together.
Yeah.
It's all, each one brings such a uniqueness to it. It's not like, you know, you can grab another blue. This is a very specific pairing. There's this characteristics that are blending because each one has certain direction that bring, or flavors that bring it together. This is like, yeah, this is a number one. We're going to impress the family and friends and everything. It's definitely there. Wow.
I'm going to take notes because I think that we should start something here. The first pairing, I like the everyman title to it. I like the jet setter title to the second flight. And we got to come up with some pretty cool names for like 3 and 4 now too, because we've set a pretty high bar with jet setter.
All right. I like that. All right. So
I backtracked. Sorry, before we move on, I backtracked to the Basil Hayden's because I didn't have the right beverage, which sounds like it's the correct beverage. And it's amazing how it did not work as well as the first 2 pairings did. So we're on the right track. It kind of flattened the Basil Hayden. It didn't stand up in the same way. So
I kind of want Basil Hayden to work because the names go together so well, you know?
we get that a lot because you guys are more popular than we are. People always ask us for the Basil Hayden Blue. So
Zoe, you're going to love this. In one of the characteristics is this delicious maple nose that's on here. That is just so elegant. That not sweet, but it's the essence of maple that is just really wonderful.